All right, let's dive right in. Today, in this explainer, we're deconstructing the exact blueprint behind that incredibly viral, cinematic, financial motivation content you've probably seen floating around online. We're looking at a really fascinating piece of source material known as the shadow currency script. Honestly, this is literally the DNA of those intense, shadowy finance clips taking over the internet. Now, we aren't here to judge the actual financial advice being given, but rather to pull back the curtain and objectively examine the psychology and the aesthetic rules that make this specific style of storytelling so undeniably magnetic. So, look at this mandated opening line. Talk about using shock and curiosity as a weapon, right? It grabs you from the very first second. It definitely doesn't ease you in with a gentle introduction. No, it starts with the bold accusation of betrayal. They lied to you. Instantly, your brain is engaged. You're wondering, well, who are they? And what exactly is the lie? By telling the viewer they've been fooled their entire life, the script creates this massive knowledge gap that you simply have to fill. But, the words are really just half the equation here. To make a hook like that truly work, the source instructions demand a very specific vocal delivery. We're talking a deep male voice, a young adult tone that is serious, calm, and slightly emotional. Why this exact combination? Well, because it projects this sort of unhurried authority. It's totally designed to make it feel like an ancient secret is finally being whispered directly to you. It's not some frantic, loud sales pitch. It's an insider quietly letting you in on the real game. And this perfectly captures the core aesthetic the creator is aiming for. The brief explicitly demands dark, cinematic, motivational storytelling using short, incredibly impactful sentences. So this isn't your traditional dry financial lecture filled with pie charts and complicated spreadsheets, not at all. It's built to feel more like an intense movie trailer. The brevity of those sentences ensures the audience never gets lost in complex financial jargon, keeping the focus entirely on the emotional weight and that gripping cinematic atmosphere. Here's the crazy part. This entire psychological arc is engineered to be executed in a highly condensed window. Just 3 to 5 minutes. That is literally all the time the script has to change the viewer's entire perspective on wealth. It's perfectly calibrated for the modern attention span, right? It's long enough to build a compelling narrative, but short enough to maximize viewer retention. It absolutely demands ruthless efficiency in every single word. Let's look at the structural blueprint for a second and see how this builds so deliberately from that jarring opening right down to the call to action. The source gives us a strict 4-step pacing. You hook them with shock, you rapidly build an emotional connection to keep them anchored, you drop the hidden truth to completely reframe their reality, and then you leave them hanging with a thought-provoking question. It is an absolute masterclass in maintaining narrative momentum. Moving on to part 1, the great wealth illusion, building the emotional connection. Right off the bat, the script sets up its first major dichotomy. It leans heavily into this widely felt frustration with the traditional education system. It explicitly contrasts what school teaches, how to get a job, with what school completely ignores, how to build actual wealth. And this builds massive trust. It's essentially saying, hey, you aren't struggling because you're flawed. You're struggling because the very institution that was supposed to prepare you entirely failed you. Then, it twists the knife a bit by stacking another powerful comparison. By contrasting extreme grinding daily effort, the fact that most people work incredibly hard, with the grim reality that most people still stay poor, the script deepens that emotional bond even further. Think about it. It is profoundly validating to hear that your lack of wealth isn't due to a lack of hard work. This relieves the viewer of personal guilt and perfectly primes them for the upcoming revelation. Now, check out the actual scripting tactics. The instructions specifically demand very simple English and deliberate, dramatic pauses. The creator notes that simple English is just easier for a global audience to digest. And the deliberate use of the ellipsis, those 3 little dots, ensures these stark emotional contrasts hit hard. The pacing allows the dark, serious tone to really sink in. The silence between the words, well, it's just as important as the words themselves. All right, part 2, revealing the hidden truth, the narrative pivot. So here's where the pivot happens. This concept is presented as the ultimate secret. It shifts the entire narrative from a shared problem, working hard but staying poor, to an exclusive piece of knowledge that the viewer is finally about to receive. It creates an us versus them dynamic, for sure, but with the promise that you are about to be invited into the inner circle. It heavily implies that wealth isn't about working harder, it's simply about changing your understanding of the rules. And then, boom, the script drops the hammer. The source material insists on delivering this bleak, impactful sentence to objectively frame wealth inequality as a systemic design, rather than some individual failure. The system is not designed for everyone to win. It is a chillingly calm statement. By externalizing the blame entirely to the system, the script brilliantly removes the last barrier of defensive skepticism of your might be holding on to. And to make sure that hidden truth really lands with maximum gravity, the instructions mandate a highly specific aesthetic palette. We're talking deep shadows, dramatic reds, stark blacks, and dark cinematic background music. This style physically reinforces the psychological message. The colors evoke danger, power, and secrecy, completely enveloping the viewer in this newly revealed, slightly unsettling reality. Which brings us to part 3, the final awakening, driving the call to action. Notice how the architecture here is totally circular. It loops right back to remind the viewer of that initial shock and betrayal introduced in the opening hook. By echoing "they lied to you about money," it perfectly ties the whole narrative together. The journey is complete, and you are brought right back to that initial feeling of indignation, but this time, you're armed with the understanding of exactly how you were lied to. This grand finale is carefully engineered not just to summarize, but to aggressively challenge the viewer's passivity. It's a very precise sequence. Synthesize everything they just learned, actively provoke their current mindset to make them super uncomfortable with staying exactly the same, and then deliver a strong call to action. It forces a clear choice. You can't just casually consume this information and go back to your normal life. You absolutely must act. And that leads us right to the mandated final line. Ending exactly as the source material intended, this provocative thought is designed to linger with the audience long after that dark, cinematic music fades out. Are you ready to wake up? It's a haunting conclusion to a highly engineered piece of psychological media. And frankly, after deconstructing the exact mechanics of how these scripts are built, well, it's a question worth asking ourselves about all the media we consume every single day.